Okay, so I decided to do a little video here. I do a lot of fifth scale stuff, so one of my main vehicles that I run a lot is the HPI Baja. Most people that follow the channel or anything else probably already understands that that's one of my main platforms that I like to deal with, is that HPI Baja platform. I think I have literally everything that there is to offer, but they had to offer. One of the things with the Baja is kind of a pain to get the thing charged because the battery stays in the battery box, and a lot of times you need a longer lead, and I know they have these squid leads and stuff, and they help out a bunch because I've used them over the years. It's pretty much the only way to really do that very well. Dynamite, years ago, had these Vision Peak Ultra chargers. Kind of a cool thing. Does multiple batteries, NiCad, nickel metal, and it does LiPos up to 3 cell, which is pretty handy because back in the day, that would have got most of the stuff that you needed to run. I mean, most people were running 2 and 3 cell LiPos, so it was good. But these things are fantastic for Baja batteries too, the little 5 cell nickel metal hydrates, 6 volters. But problem is when you get one, it comes like this. You got this little bit of short lead on it, and so in order to try to get up in a Baja, I should probably have one here to show you, but I'll put some photos and stuff. But in order to get up in there, you almost have to have this charger hanging from this lead, and it's really not very convenient. And a lot of times you want the charger sitting somewhere else. It's like I've got an Axis RC stand. I actually have 3 of them, and they have a work tray below it, and so it's super convenient if you can plug the battery in and just put your charger down on the work tray. And so I have 2 Vision Peak Ultras. We just installed some lead extensions. So I think about doing a whole video of literally putting these lead extensions into my other charger. So hopefully I'll actually do all of this, and we can shoot a video and show you how this all works. So we'll get in a little bit closer so you can see kind of more about what I'm doing, and from there you'll see it. So I already have the ends of these things already stripped back, so we'll just start tinning our ends. Anytime you're doing soldering like this, you always want to tin the ends of your wires. That's super important. Most people don't even really think about that, but it's like, in order to get a really good connection, you always want to use flux. I use a liquid flux, and you want to tin these wires. That way, when you hook these two together, both sides, if you have both sides of your joint tinned, when you stick it together, basically you're just melting solder together, and so that makes the connection, and the solder is already melted into the wire, so the solder's made good connection with the wire on both ends, and then all you're doing is hooking the solder together in the middle. So a lot of people make soldering a little more complicated than it really is, but having good equipment is also important too, and using proper stuff. So a lot of technique involved with some of this stuff. Soldering is definitely one of those things. Anybody that's tried it probably tell you, for somebody who's just starting out, it's not near as easy as it looks. And the big thing is on top of not being very easy, if you don't do a good job at it, it's a huge problem for you. Most of these connections do high current, and so anything that's going to require high current is going to require a good connection. If not, the resistance in that connection will build heat and burn stuff up and cause you all kinds of problems. So anytime you're dealing with electronics, you want to be super careful and make sure you get stuff right. Last thing you need is trouble, especially in today's world. You got, brushless motor systems and things like that are really taking high current, and so you want to make sure that you have battery connections and things like that done really good, because this charger stuff, I mean, I think the maximum charge that this thing will even do is 4 amps or 6 amps or something like that. Super, super low, because you're just charging a battery, you know. But when you're discharging a battery through a brushless motor system, especially some of these new things, I mean, some of these things are 100 amp plus discharge, and so that's a big deal. You can burn stuff up pretty easy at 100 amps. You can burn stuff up pretty easy at 40 amps if you don't watch what you're doing. So the discharge is super important. Also, make sure that your motor connections and things like that are good too. Those are all high current connections. Anytime you're dealing with a high current connection, you have any kind of a breakdown in that connection is going to cause you problems. And it can transfer around. I mean, you might end up start burning up ESCs, or start burning up motors, or battery connections, just electrical connections. That's why, I mean, one of these days I'll probably do a whole video on battery connections and why today the Dean's plug that I've used, and I still use a ton of, I use a ton of Dean's plugs because a lot of the stuff I do is crawling, and we're not really pulling more than the maximum rated 60 amps through that Dean's plug. So most Dean plugs I think are 50 amps actually. So the XT60 was definitely the next generation, because you wanted to have the ability to pull 60 amps through that connection. And now they're doing XT90s where you can pull 90 amps, or the connection is rated for 90 amps, which is, it's crazy high in actuality. But when you have ESCs and things like that that are 160 amp discharge and stuff like that, definitely something that you gotta have. I'm using all the ends of these are now tinned, so now that I've actually done this, I'm just using my solder, and I'm basically just hooking these 2 tinned ends of these wires together. And once that all melts, just let it cool, and that joint is actually very good. I will actually take a picture of it right now. My phone's over there. So same thing with this one. Both ends of these wires are already tinned, so you use a little bit of solder, and all we're doing is melting these 2 soldered ends together. So we're basically just hooking the solder together. The solder is already in each wire because of the tinning job, and as soon as that's melted, we're good. And so it's probably hard to see from all the way over there. If you can see those at all, those are actually some pretty good connections. And so, like I said, this is literally a maximum of probably 6 amps anyway, so it's not a high current. But once we get it like this, we want to use a little bit of heat shrink. So heat shrink these wires over the connections. This is the part that took the longest. I already did this on the other one, so I kind of know how long this takes. It's way longer than I expected it to be honest. But so now those soldered connections are covered and protected by some heat shrink. This stuff is actually fairly thin, and I always overdo stuff. That's just kind of the way that I do things. So I'm going to double coat these with this thin stuff, and then put a thing of thick over it to make it look like it's a super professional job. And when this thing's done, it really will look very nice. Not only will it look nice, but it'll be super functional as well, which is what we want. So now we did that. And then we take this big chunk and we hook all of this together, because these two wires that we're hooking with are not hooked together like the leads in and out of the charger. So then we run this over all of this. So it goes all the way out into the old wiring on both ends, hooking all of this together. Gives you a super, like a professional looking end. This thing is so much easier, faster. So from here, I cover most of this wire. Hooking all of this stuff together again. Keeping these things separated is kind of a pain, but it's like, in order to keep them in the insulation rate, you kind of want to do that. So. Kind of pain to get too wired. I don't really go with much a lot bigger. It's like I want it to pull down tight. So let's feed this through here and up into our end piece again. Now we start torching this thing down because we gotta keep these wires straight in here. See, they get twisted inside here, and it wants to twist inside the heat shrink. I don't want that. And yes, if you're wondering, I am that big. But, you know, it's all about, if you're going to take time to do something and you're going to do it custom, do it the way you want it. While you're doing it custom. Because you wanted it this way. So now we have this much of this thing completely hooked together. Looks really good. We can get one more big piece so we can kind of put a finishing touch on the end, hooking it all together, including this outer sheath and the inner sheath, all of it. Giving it a super finished look. So, now good work on this end. What we need to do is we need to get another little piece of sheathing to cover the outside. Make it smaller so we don't have to leave a little bit sticking out, because we gotta work on the other end. Put those on. If you guys can see me, I kind of get out of camera every now and then. Alright, so work this down over the other stuff. Just enough to make sure you got a good overlap and you got enough wires hanging out. Good to go. Let's keep keeping this stuff all straight. If you do enough of this stuff, you just won't have any. You won't have any hair on your hands, so you don't need to worry about that. Hey, hello. So, 80% of our lead is finished. So now it gets tricky because we have to put all of our heat shrink on here to end this. And so if you're going to do a truly professional looking job, you got to plan this out, because you have to slide stuff up on here in order to be able to actually finish this off. Very tight. That end's got to be pretty tight. So you want to let this cool off a little bit, and we're going to cut off a little bit more of our sheathing. Make sure that we're good there. That should be enough sheathing. And now you have to understand, this is going to cover up everything that's left. So you want to make sure you have enough to cover all of your wire, plus have enough overlap. So that ought to be plenty. And hopefully, it's pretty wrinkled. Hopefully I can get it all on there. Let's see. Alright. So, once you get this through, now you got two wires sticking out here. So now, this is something we'll slide up later. This is going to cover everything back up. So now we got to get two more pieces of this, smaller stuff, so we can cover our solder joints once we're done soldering these together. So we slide these on. So these will cover our solder joint. And normally, like I've said, I'm quite picky, and so I like to cover those twice. So we gotta have two sets to slide up over. Plus, when we're done, we want to make sure that we have one or two. Possibly, I'll do two. And these are going to be what covers everything. It'd be the bigger stuff. So we'll put this longer one at the end here, on the other end of our wires. And we got to put this on the other end because it's going to hold everything together. So it's encompassing both wires. The other ones are on each wire individually. So you always got to keep that in mind when you get ready to do this, because staging all this stuff is super important. So here we go. We get ready to hook all this stuff together. Make sure we get our wires in here. We can hold them good and firm. We'll go ahead and re-dip our wires into some flux. Make sure our solder wants to stick. A little bit of solder on here, and like I said, here we go again. We're just going to melt these solders together. They're already soldered into the wires. All we're doing is hooking the two pieces of solder together. Negative's done. Okay, positive side. That's just how fast that happens. So these joints are actually really good. Actually really good. So from here we let everything cool down a little bit, and here's how this stages out, just so you can see this finish out. So we slide the first ones up over our solder joint. It's kind of tricky because it's kind of like one thickness insulation. One of them's got a little thicker insulation than the other. So then we shrink these down. That makes those look really good. And then we let that cool just a little bit. And then we bring the second stage over our solder joint, which is on individual wires. Bring those over. And we heat these in. Go back to the torch. So much better. So each wire individually is very well protected. So then we slide our first piece down to cover all of this. So we want to make sure that we cover both solder joints with this well. Okay. And once we get to here, this has pretty much got this end sealed off. So we're good there. Everything looks good. We're all still looking good. So the first thing we want to do is we want to slide this sleeve that we slid up over. This whole thing, we want to slide it up and cover our end piece to give it the cool looking finished end. So once again, we go to the end of this and we're going to start with our heat shrink. All that in there. That thing is thoroughly sealed and protected. And now you've extended this whole lead out to probably nearly 4 foot or more. And so now you can sit this charger somewhere and you can get this thing fished up into your Baja, plug this thing in, and you're good to go. So I'll get this thing over here closer. Hopefully this camera is showing you this pretty well. This thing looks pretty good. And I will take some pictures of my finished ends. And that's how it's done.